good afternoon, and welcome to Fire Away, a brand new online Q&A show focusing on the employment law issues that matter to you. Fire Away is going to be running monthly online, and my name is Stuart Rudner. I'm an employment lawyer, mediator, and more importantly, your host for Fire Away. And every month, we're going to be taking your questions and having different guests.
Welcome to episode 100 of Fire Away. We're so excited to be celebrating our 100th episode with you all. Thank you for joining us for this very special edition of the show. I'm Brittany Taylor, partner at Rudner Law, and I'm going to be your host for today. I am going to be joined by two guests without whom this show would literally not exist. First, of course, is Stuart Rudner, managing partner of Rudner Law and your regular and favorite host of the show. And in front of the camera for the first time, Mark Robbins, who is the executive producer of Fire Away, as well as the CEO of Lawyer Locate and Legal 2. Today, we're going to be looking backwards to the very start of the show and discussing how Fire Away came to be, some of the early challenges of bringing the show to life, and how things have changed, as well as reminiscing about our favorite topics, guests, and funny moments from the show. We're also going to be looking forward and discussing what the future might hold in store for Fire Away. So let's get into it. Thank you, Mark and Stuart, for joining us.
Thank you, Brittany.
Thanks for agreeing to do this, and thanks for raising this issue of who the favorite host is. I've always been scared to ask people because I think I'd be out of a job if we did.
Just like nip that in the bud right there.
Exactly.
There is no favoritism here.
Exactly. Okay, well, let's jump right into it. I want to know, where did the idea for Fire Away come from, and what made you guys want to start the show?
Well, yeah, it's fun to look back on this stuff now. So first of all, I will give full credit to Mark because the idea was his, and he'd been doing a similar show with a family lawyer, and I was a guest on that show. I think Mark wanted me to be a guest just so I can get a sense of what it's like, and then really push me to do a show. I don't think it took a lot of pushing. I think I was pretty open to the idea pretty quickly, but I was thinking about this, in anticipation of our discussion. It was kind of a logical extension of what I've been doing throughout most of my career, which is essentially building profile. And I was really lucky when I was a younger lawyer. I had a number of informal mentors, including in addition to my formal mentor. But one of them in particular emphasized a number of things. One is how it's really important as a lawyer building your practice to have a good network and build up your book of clients because that gives you independence. But she also emphasized that one way to do it, and she thought I would like this, was by building my profile. And at the time, I'm dating myself a bit, that was being done by writing articles which appeared in printed publications. So I wrote a lot of articles for Canadian Employment Law Today and Canadian HR Reporter back when there was no online version of them. And also speaking, in person at speaking engagements. I did a lot of those things. And then as time went on, all of a sudden blogs became a thing. So I started blogging, and then social media, and we can talk about that more. But I was one of the earlier adopters amongst the legal industry to use social media. So it was always about profile building. And as they explained to me, it's you're playing the long game, right? It's very rare that you speak at one event and someone calls you the next day and says, "I have to retain you." But it's becomes more common when you get calls or emails from people saying, "I've been following you for years and I've seen you speak, I've read your stuff, or I love your podcast, and I'd like to talk about working together." So it's always been my long-term plan, even if it wasn't so much of a plan as something I just ended up doing. And then when Mark suggested this idea of a show, it sounded like fun. It sounded like the type of thing I would like to do. And unlike the one-off speaking engagements, which were great, but back then they weren't usually recorded, so there was no record of them. This was something where I could reach a much larger audience, and there'd be a record of it, and I could do it without having to leave my office. So sounded like a lot of fun. And then as we fleshed out the details, it sounded even better.
That's
Yeah,
great. Oh, sorry, Mark, go ahead.
no, it's okay. That my recollection was pretty much what Stuart's saying. What, there's several things to talk about as far as how this all came about. You're right. It was, we were producing another podcast, and you have to bear in mind this is 8 years ago, and that other podcast we started 10 years ago was very early. I mean, podcasting was just kind of a real small niche area at that time. We didn't really have all the avenues of the podcast outlets that we do today for audio and video. That's all changed. So it was, like Stuart said, it was not a risk. You're not taking a risk because we certainly saw the future of marketing on any vertical, whether it's legal or whatever you're selling, which is video. I know I've told this story several times, but briefly, like Kevin O'Keefe, who owns and runs LexBlog, which is a blogging aggregate and promotes for years. He and I have got to know him very well for 20 odd years. We used to butt heads saying, I said, no, the future is video. Blogging is dead. And I still stand by that. I do believe that blogging is dead, and we can talk about SEO now that that's all changing with AI searching now. AI results are not so content driven. They're driven on reputation. Reputations are established in video now, not on blogs. So, but when we started the show, to Stuart's credit, he was extremely open to the idea of the show, and I didn't take much pitching to, sort it out, other than the crossing the T's and dotting the I's on the agreement, and then it was just because I believe in this. I said, we're just going to dive in. We're not going to script it. He said he wasn't too pleased about that initially. He wanted said, "Well, can I have points?" I said, "Of course you can have points, but I don't want you reading a teleprompter like another person did that I was producing for and refused to." Because I believe, and I think it's proved to be true from 8 years ago, people want to see mistakes. People want to see you're human. They don't want to watch CBC at 6. That's not going to keep people coming back. They want you to have mistakes. Like we tell our guests, Brittany, you know this. We caution them. We say, if you flub, I'm probably not going to edit it out. So you be comfortable with yourself and just have that conversation. Now, the question I want to ask Stuart, because I don't remember, how did we come up with the name?
Oh,
That was one of my questions. Absolutely, I want to know that.
That's a great question. I mean, I don't know. I'm going to take credit because no one else remembers what happened.
I think I know. I think I know because I remember one of the things you distinctly requested, because the original show was shot in your boardroom in Markham.
Yeah.
And you specifically arranged the bookshelf behind you to show your book.
Yes.
And what's the title of your book?
Yeah, the book is You're Fired.
And I'm pretty sure that's where we got the idea of Fire Away. It came from that book title.
Yeah. No, that's exactly where I was going. I think it was, a lot of our work, as Brittany knows, is dealing with people who have been fired. So yeah, it was a fun play on words. And I think, this is one of the things that's changed. I know we're going to talk about how the show has evolved, but I think initially we were hoping for a bit more audience interaction, like live interaction of questions. So we're hoping people would literally fire away with questions, and things have changed over the years, but I think that's where it came from. And I just want to pick up on one thing you said, Mark, because I think it was really important. Like, yeah, you always emphasize this. It's not the news. We want you to be yourself. We want you to, if you stumble, if you flub a line, whatever it is, we're not going to edit it. And by the way, I want to come back and ask you if we've ever edited out something like that, because I don't think we have. But it gets along with the other point, or sorry, not the other point, but the other thing I've always tried to do, part of that profile building, as someone said to me, was just letting people get to know who you are. Because as someone very directly said to me once, there's a lot of good employment lawyers out there. But your clients want to find someone that they want to work with. They want to find someone that they like. So all of this stuff, writing articles, speaking engagements, doing a podcast, social media, people get to see your personality. And assuming it's one that they like, it's going to really, really help. People will, if you are welcoming, if you seem to be open and friendly, people are going to reach out, and it's going to lead to relationships, which may lead to work. It may not, but it may, over time, it will definitely help you build your network. So that was another reason I love this idea. It's just another example or another way for me to have some fun, talk about law to some extent, but also just kind of, be myself and have some fun with it. So that was what I loved about the plan, especially as Mark can convince me over time to even be more and more flexible and free flowing with how we do it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of my favorite parts of watching the show and of also being a host of the show is just how candid guests can be. And I think allowing it to be more of a discussion format really does allow people to open up and talk about whatever they want in the context of the topic, but not feel restricted by a script, right? By I have to make sure that I'm getting to this specific talking point. And I find that they get there eventually anyway. They're just getting
Right.
there in a way that gets you allows you to get to know them as well. So definitely one thing that I've really enjoyed about the show. I want to circle back to I think both of you mentioned the kind of original vision or structure of the show. So what was the original the basic blueprint when you were first coming up with the idea and you guys were brainstorming this? What exactly did it look like?
So I'll jump
Yeah.
in on the
I
tech
was going to say,
side
why don't you go first, Mark?
because there's an evolution to how the show was shot and how it was being done. So originally, like Stuart said, we thought we would try to attract a live audience. And again, this was a formula that I had created for other people, and it to varying degrees of success. So we originally did the show from, like I said, from your old Markham boardroom,
Yeah.
pretty similar setup to what we have now. But instead Stuart was in a chair and we had an angle set to capture a background that we wanted to have. And he had to have a monitor so that he could be talking to and know who he was talking to see them. And then we did it live. So we had a company in Washington, DC, that would actually stream it live and edit on the fly. And the whole idea of that was that we hoped that we could then get people to either write in, text in, to ask questions. It never really gelled. And we just, after, I don't know how many years, Stuart, did we do the live stream? Three or
Oh, I think it
four?
was more than that.
Five?
I was going to
Yeah,
say
because
six,
we just
six or
started doing
seven.
the way we do it now. This is the second season.
Yeah, I think we did 6 seasons live.
Right, right. And so that was the evolution. It went from that. And then let's not forget, in between all that, we had COVID. So that also made a big change in how we were going to do the show. And I think that there's nothing good about COVID. But I think that because of COVID, it made it a lot easier for us to just slide into the remote show.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's one of the things I really like one of the changes I really like is now it's a lot more comfortable. Like doing it in the boardroom. I don't know if you remember this, Mark. Like we wanted to have the kind of the law library behind me with my book, as you said. We also wanted to have a bit of the window where you could see people walking back and forth. And so I had to be at the corner. We had, this big boardroom table, but I was sort of jammed into a little corner, just so we could get the right angle. So it was always kind of a struggle. And then if we had guests that were live there, they'd be a different part of the boardroom table. And I don't know, it just seemed like a lot of work. And now that I can do this from my home office, and people can connect remotely, it makes it a lot easier. We can have guests from much further away, but that's also changed quite a bit. I don't know if you want to talk about, or if you're going to come back to this, Mark, like the general idea for the format of the show and how it would, what it was going to look like.
Well, I think the general format, I keep going back to the same place, was a formula that I had worked on with other clients. And with you, though, we really wanted to, I kind of put the idea in your head. I said, it's one thing to stay in employment law, but we want to step out of that box. Because if you're just staying with that one theme, we're not going to be interesting. And you and I talked about it several times. I said, let's, I things that pop into my mind, was when marijuana was legalized. Well, there was a million questions, and we had some great lawyers that came on to talk about it. We had other HR people to come on and talk about it. And I don't know how many shows we got out of it, but I want to say there was 3 or 4 shows that we got out of just talking about the legalization of marijuana in the workplace and how that would all evolve out. So, I think the good thing about Fireway is that we don't pigeonhole our guests into one little vertical category, that we're willing to step outside that. And, sometimes it doesn't always directly tie into employment law or HR. Mediation, which was one we had not really addressed until both of us brought it up, and then we had some mediators come on and had a whole discussion on how that. And frankly, I loved it because I learned a bunch of stuff, which is one of the nice things about being behind the camera, is that I can, learn things and that I would not normally have an opportunity to do that in my background.
Yeah, no, I always like that. And I think we're pushing the boundaries more, which I think is great. And so some things are clearly related to HR or HR law. Some things it's a bit more tangential. And I usually try to find a way to at least bring it back a little bit to that. But yeah, we've talked about some really cool stuff. And I know we're going to talk a bit about some of our favorites and my favorites. But we've had some really fun topics, which I've really enjoyed. And I think we've expanded in the last couple of seasons, particularly. We've expanded the topics, and I think we will continue to do that. One of the things that changed too, though, is like this. We never called this a podcast when we started, right?
Yeah,
This
that's
was
right.
I never quite knew how to talk about it. I always referred to it as I have a show,
Right.
and it was kind of a video show, and then there was kind of an audio option. And even when podcasts became a thing, it took us a while to start really referring to this as primarily as a podcast with the sort of video option, although many podcasts are video now anyway. So that's one thing that's definitely changed. I think it just kind of shows that we were ahead of our time, because this type of show is not nearly as common then as it is now.
Right. Exactly.
No, that's so interesting. I think it's so neat to think about the original design of the show being this kind of live with questions coming in live and having to address that kind of on the spot. And where it is now. That's such an interesting evolution from that kind of original plan.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the challenges that you guys faced early on in the show. So, I think we've talked a little bit about some of them, like having to be live. Stuart, I loved your description of you on the very corner of the of the table. So, what other kind of challenges did you guys face when you were just starting out with the show?
Stuart, the first thing that comes to mind, how many times can you remember at the last minute we had to replace a guest?
Wow, really?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It happened. Well, I got pressed into one show
Yeah.
because we lost a guest, and that was one of the big challenges about doing live, was coordinating, like my staff trying to coordinate, and Stuart would have 2 guests. It's one thing to have one guest, but you have 2 guests, and then Stuart's schedule and the line producer's schedule. It was a nightmare for us on our side of it. Not so much for Stuart, but for my production team, it was horrendous. I never breathed such a sigh of relief when we decided to no longer go live, because it meant I had a lot more flexibility on scheduling. I could accommodate guest schedules and make it work with Stuart's schedule. It just made it so much easier. But that to me was the biggest challenge that we had.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I would be holding my breath too, because if we had to replace a guest with you, all of a sudden the topic changed, and I've got to, not that we scripted it, but I had my topic talking points, and all of a sudden it changed. So that was a big one. I mean, well, the other big one for me was just nerves, because it was, especially when we were doing it live, it was very nerve-wracking getting ready for it. And even though now we don't do it live and we never go back and edit it, but it's just nice to have that comfort level. And of course, just over the years, I've gotten more comfortable, and Brittany, you have as well. I mean, I remember you were extremely reluctant, I think, to do this, and perhaps more nervous than I was, but I think you've gotten extremely comfortable now. So that was a big challenge. The other thing was just tech, right? I mean, Mark, I don't know if you remember, it feels like almost every month there was some tech issue. Something wasn't working.
Yep.
And of course, because it was live, we had to be ready to go at noon. And there were issues like because we were running live, if I remember correctly, on Facebook and on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. Or that was the idea. But sometimes LinkedIn wouldn't play nice. Sometimes
Right.
Facebook wouldn't play
Right.
nice. So there were issues, and all of a sudden we'd realize, oh, the Facebook stream isn't streaming, or there's something here, or the microphone isn't working. So there was a lot of that, and it seemed like it was every month. And now, now we're not live, so it's less of an issue if we need to delay a little bit and fix it.
Yeah, and you mentioned the tech evolution for you. If I go back to what the equipment you were originally using to where you are now, it's night and day. I mean, and you're right. We used to have sound issues, like, that still happens once in a while. We have that issue with guests sometimes, but that's the beauty of taping. We can do some edits in post, and we can, cover up where, somebody froze for 30 seconds, and my production staff can go in and make that look okay and clean it up, or put a graphic in and have their voice still going in the background. But, like your Yeti mic, for example, that was a new thing for you.
Yeah.
I think originally you were using a laptop mic, if I remember correctly. Certainly the first few shows. And then we got with our guy in the States, and I said, give me some recommendations of what equipment is, cost effective, but is going to give us the good quality. And that's where we arrived on the Yeti, because I had been using a Yeti for a while and I really liked them. When I was just doing videos and that. So, but yeah, the evolution, then your camera. I mean, how
Right.
many cameras did you go through over the years? Like,
Yeah. And we're probably due for a new one as well, but at least this is holding up pretty well, I think.
yeah, for sure.
So
It's amazing to reminisce about some of this stuff. I agree with you, Stuart. The nerves for me, I still don't like being in front of the camera, but I do think I've gotten used to it.
yeah.
I prefer to be behind, but I think I've gotten used to it. But I remember one thing that I laugh about now about the live show is, Mark, do you remember how much time we would spend getting people centered
Oh
in the
God,
shot?
yes,
And like
yes,
so we'd
Yeah.
have to join half an hour early to make sure
yeah,
that we were all within the boxes that we needed
yeah,
to be in, and then you couldn't move. So if
yeah,
you if you needed a glass of water, it was too late.
yeah,
Like you're in your position and that's it. You're
yeah,
set for the show.
yeah.
And yeah, we
Rob
couldn't
was
use virtual
anal.
backgrounds. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah,
So
Rob
everything
was anal
behind
about that
you.
stuff. He was,
Yeah.
he was, he, and to his credit, I mean, he did a really, really good job.
It looked great.
Yeah, and I do agree with as you guys already know this, that I'm not a fan of virtual backgrounds. Says the guy that's got a blurred tonight today. It's
Yeah.
only because I'm not set up for this show. I'm set up for my own podcast, so I'm not going to push my logos on Fire Away at this point, anyway.
Right.
But yeah, I do remember that. And some of these guests, and he would always say, "Don't rock back and forth, right? Don't
Yeah,
rock." And every person he told that to did it. Because I think it's
absolutely.
that you put it in their head and they're, well,
Exactly.
I'm just gonna say,
Yeah. Oh, and
That's
speaking of which,
absolutely
so
it.
remember we used to joke for every episode that I would always tend to drift toward the light.
yes, yes,
And I can see now actually the sunlight is slowly spreading across, sorry, this side of my
yeah,
face, because one of my blinds not closed. But yeah, I
right.
remember Rob would get me set, and then I would slowly but surely drift this way over time because the
Yeah.
light was that way, like a plant. So I remember that. But Rob also taught me about like framing yourself properly. I learned a lot of great things from him.
Oh
So
yeah.
he was great in that sense. And but yeah, I think now that we're not in the boardroom and people, I guess it's because they're more comfortable in their own office or their own home, because they're not nearly as nervous about, well, can I move? Can I rock? Can I do this? Can I do
Right.
that? I don't think we've ever had a problem with someone going totally out of the frame or cutting off their face or anything like that.
So you know what? You talk about guests. So I want to, I don't know whether I made you aware of this, but some of our past guests, when they were told that we were doing our 100th episode taping, wanted to share their thoughts with you. So without kind of big introduction, one of our guests, Axis Geffen, was on, I think it's a year ago now. I'm not going to be exactly sure, but he wanted to share some thoughts with you. So let's have a listen.
Stuart hitting 100 episodes as a milestone in Fire Away is not surprising. Not at all. Amazing show. Obviously, very informative. Good for everybody. But what have we really learned in 100 episodes? I think what we really learned is people entered these employment arrangements for a lot of different reasons. And the most critical thing to do is to make sure that communication is open, transparency needs to be on both sides, contracts always need to be transparent, understood, and have both parties with lots of opportunity to review them, encouraged to review them with individual counsel, and to basically agree to them on open terms. And most importantly, and probably above all else, I think what we've learned is if you think you need an employment lawyer, you probably do.
Well, that's awesome. And actually, Axis is one of our relatively few repeat guests. He's been on at least 2 episodes and possibly
right.
3. And a longtime friend and friend of the firm, and one of our go-to investigators. But yeah, Axis, thank you so much for taking the time to offer those kind words. And given that investigations are not going away, I'm pretty sure we'll have you back on Fireway again as we go forward.
Excellent.
Excellent. That's great. Okay, should we move on to some of our favorite topics? I think we've touched a little bit already on some of the or the variety of topics that we've had on the show, but I'd love to hear from both of you about your kind of favorite topics that have been covered over these 100 episodes.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And it gave me a chance. I was looking back at the list of episodes, gave me a chance to reflect on some of the really interesting ones we've had. And the problem is there were 2. I started to make a list, and then I was listing probably 85 out of 100 episodes. So I had to cut that down a bit. But I mean, top of the list, and pretty much anything in my life is always going to be hockey. So we've had a few episodes where we got to combine employment law and hockey, and very few things make me as happy as that. So, we had episodes with Dan McGarry and Peter Santini. We also had John Curtis and Larissa Donovan. And what I think probably one of my favorites, and this I remember was in the boardroom, it was shortly after Don Cherry, the whole Don Cherry incident and him being, kicked off of Hockey Night in Canada. And so we got to talk about that, but also talked about, how you would handle that in a corporate context. And if you were HR and one of your employees made comments like what Don had said on air, and how do you handle that? So that was a lot of fun. And then we also talked about, the Chicago Blackhawks had a sexual harassment scandal, with just horrific facts. But again, we got to tie that back to HR and HR laws. So I love it when we can combine hockey and HR. That's one of my favorites. So we had a couple of episodes like that. Axis Geffen, who we just heard from, talking about investigations and how people get them wrong, and also some of his favorite memories of investigations, where what people do, how they try to lie, how you can tell people are lying. That I actually thought was really fascinating. And learning about body language and things like that. And most investigators, including Axis, are clear. Like a lot of the rumors you hear are not true. If someone doesn't look you in the eye, they're lying. Well, we all know that's not right, and it's very based upon culture. But some of the other things that he's talked about in terms of being able to realize when someone is probably not telling the truth were great. I had to laugh when I look back at some of our COVID episodes. So Richa Sandil, who is a good friend of myself, a good friend of the firm, an excellent lawyer. But I was laughing because I think it was a very last minute thing. We had her on, and I looked at the date. It was March 19th, 2020. So, of course, as we all know now, that was just at the very, very beginning of COVID. But Richa and I talked about how to navigate COVID at that point. We had no clue what we were going to be seeing. And then that was episode 23. Episode 25 and 26, we spent a lot of time talking about the end of COVID and how to bring everyone back to the workplace.
Yeah.
I mean, I just laughed because we were so naive. And as a firm, Brittany, we often joke about this because I think we published our, return to the workplace guideline in May of 2020.
Right. Very hopeful.
Yeah, naively optimistic. Yeah. And then getting back to, some of my other favorite topics, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think. Matt Richardson was a guest, and he talked about, doing social media searches on candidates. And, Matt, works with, the RCMP and other international legal authorities and understands the dark web and how to find people and wrongdoers and people who do absolutely horrific things. But he also, I guess, pays the bills by helping organizations do background checks on candidates. And he gave a lesson on how to do social media checks on candidates thoroughly. And he told a great story about working for a municipality, he didn't name which one, who had already identified their top candidate, and I think maybe even made a conditional offer to them. And then Matt went online and very quickly determined this guy was part of an incel group and was espousing these, just completely offensive, misogynistic views and theories. And this guy would have been a very public hire for a public municipality. It would have been a horrible PR nightmare that they managed to avoid. So that was another of my favorite shows. One of the things we've talked about over the years, we've tried to have two guests on a lot of the time, and I always wanted to have more debate, and we've really struggled with this. I guess people tend to agree on a lot of things we discuss. It's hard to get disagreement amongst the guests, but one where we had some disagreement was an episode, it was 84, where we were talking about DEI initiatives, and it was very polite and respectful. But it was Pamela McKelvin from the U.S. and Rakesh Tiku from here in Ontario, and it was great. I mean, the reason I wanted Rakesh on this show, because I'm in a networking group with him, and I know he will always play devil's advocate, and he's always respectful, but he'll always ask the questions that many of us are reluctant to. So that I thought was a really good conversation. One of the few we've had where there was a bit of debate between our guests. So I really enjoyed that one. I can keep going, but I think the other one that I will mention now, maybe we'll come back to two I'll mention. One, last time, Mark, that you were in front of the camera, I believe, was with Jared Correa, who has his own podcast, Legal Late Night, and has had other podcasts in the past. He's very well-known podcaster, writer, thinker, consultant. I thought it was just a really fun conversation with you and with Jared. And the other thing is, the clip shows that we've done. So internally, we've had our team, or parts of the Rudner Law team. Usually it's kind of a year-end holiday show. Right. And we've done it a few times where we've taken TV and movie clips as examples of what not to do in the world of HR. So anytime I can, I mentioned anytime I can have hockey, if I can have The Simpsons on my show as well, that always makes me laugh. So those are, like I said, I could have named 80 more episodes, but those are some of my favorites.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great. Mark, do you have any favorites?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go back to one just because I've known this guest for many years. Actually, I knew him before I actually knew Stuart, and actually this guest introduced me to Stuart at one of the solo small business conferences by the Ontario, well then Upper Canada, now it's Ontario Law Society. And we went out, I did a thing that back in those days called Beer for Bloggers. So I would host, we'd buy some beers at a local bar that would be close to where the conference was. And it was Omar Haradai. And we had him on, I think it was twice, but I know the one was, again, was the discussion on marijuana in the workplace, because he had a very varied legal background, as well as he has a degree in nuclear whatever, like just he has all these crazy degrees and all that. But yeah, I thought he was a great guest. I thought the topic was, at the time, because it was front page news, everybody's, oh my God, the whole world's going to go to hell, Canada's going to go to hell on marijuana, oh, what's going to happen, people are, of course, we know nothing of the sort happened at all. Everything's been quite as it should have been, quite normal. And if anything, I find, a lot of the stuff that we talked about with marijuana, some of the fear, like the COVID errors, it's actually turned out the opposite. There's less people using marijuana than when it was black market. So, but yeah, I thought that he was a great guest, and I thought the conversation went really, really well on that show.
Yeah, that was, I mean, Omar is great, and you're right. He's kind of he wears a million hats because he's got a bunch of degrees and a bunch of different jobs and practices as well. But he's been on at least twice. One of them was marijuana, and yeah, that was a really good episode. I have to say, the whole marijuana in the workplace allowed me to see maritime Canada because for whatever reason, every maritime province invited me out to speak to them on the issue of marijuana in the
Oh, wow.
workplace. So I just remember, Brittany, I don't know if you remember this, but it was like every month I was going to a different maritime city to do a presentation on marijuana in the workplace. I'm not sure what that says about the Maritimes, but that was great. And as I like to joke, it also gave me an opportunity that will probably never be replicated, which is that Ron McLean, again, going back to Hockey Night in Canada, Ron McLean, I like to joke, opened for me. I went, well,
Wow.
so the true story is that I was speaking at a conference. Ron McLean was the keynote speaker, as he well deserves to be. But his flight was also changed and moved up. So we had to leave earlier. So they asked if I would be agreeable to going after Ron. And I, of course, quite kindly agreed to do so, and then bragged about the fact that I was actually the keynote and he was opening up for me that day.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. So listen, I guess can't stop doing this. We've got another guest that sent a video in and wanted to talk to you and share his experiences as a guest on Fire Away. So let's see what Chris Robertson has to say about Fire Away.
Hey, we're so glad to be invited to say a little bit about You're Fired. We loved being on the podcast. It was super fun, and we've watched lots of episodes. And hats off to you, Stuart. Trailblazer and early adopter, 100 episodes. That's a huge accomplishment. May our own little podcast, Water Cooler Justice, make it to 100.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you for blazing the trail, as Chris said. We're so excited. We're only on episode 11. I can't wait till we get to episode 100. But congratulations to you. That's an amazing accomplishment. And I can't wait to see what you've got in the upcoming year.
And again, Stuart, congratulations on all your success.
Well, that is awesome. So thank you, Chris, and thank you, Sarah, as well. And Chris and Sarah have a fantastic podcast as well called Water Cooler Justice, which I've been a guest on and hoping to be a guest on again. And I will forgive you, Chris, for referring to my podcast as You're Fired and not Fire Away. But as we talked about earlier, there's an obvious reason why. I guess that just means that you love my book. So I appreciate that, and I wish you the best of luck as you move on to the second 10 of your podcast. I think you're on episode 11 now.
Awesome.
That's wonderful. That's great. Well, speaking of guests, let's talk about some of our favorite guests that we've had over the years. And we've talked about favorite topics and episodes. What about the people that make it happen?
I think we've talked about a number of them already because
Right.
as usual, scripts don't work for this show, so we've bounced around a lot already. But I'll say one of the things as I thought about it, put a smile on my face, was the fact that Mitch Warsoff was a guest. Mitch Warsoff was a guest of talking about criminal law and the kind of intersection between criminal law and HR law. But the reason this put a smile on my face is because I have known Mitch for 40 years now. And I first met Mitch. I grew up in Montreal, as many viewers know. And I used to try to earn some extra money when I was about 14 years old by acting as a scorekeeper at the local arena. And Mitch was a couple of years older than me. And so he was playing when I was scorekeeping. And over time, he was always a friendly guy, as he still is now. But I don't think he ever knew my name. He would just call me Scorekeep. So fast forward about 10 years, I'm at Osgoode Hall Law School, starting my first year. And one of the older kids is walking down the hall, and I thought he looked familiar, and he just walked by me and then stopped, turned around and said, "Hey, Scorekeep, how's it going?"
That's great.
So we renewed our friendship, and then about 30 years after that, we'd kept in touch all along, but I asked him to be a guest on Fire Away, and he very graciously agreed to do that. So I will throw him in among my favorite guests for that reason. We've mentioned a lot of the people I thought of, but I was also going to mention Lauren McDonald, who is a friend, a very well-respected disability rights lawyer, very well-written, well-spoken, well-respected, and she's been on a few times. And I don't think I've ever actually gotten to host her, Brittany. I think you've hosted her
I have.
every time, which I'm a little jealous of. But the fact that she is gracious enough to be on the podcast, I really appreciate, because she is so well known and does great work. So I wanted to mention her in particular. And I guess some of the guests we've had lately, I think this is cool just because I think it shows how, as we've talked about, we're expanding the breadth of our guests and our topics. So we mentioned Jared Correa, who is, out of the US and talks more about sort of legal podcasting and, gave advice on how lawyers can use things like podcasts. We also had Matthew Kurbis, who is known as the subscription attorney. So talking about use of subscription arrangements, which of course is a big passion of our firm. But he's also, I think of him as being more of a podcast celebrity. And Moshe Amsel as well is going to, this episode has not aired yet, but he's going to be a guest as well. And I also think of him as being in a different league than I think of myself. But so it's kind of cool that we're getting guests with bigger networks and bigger profiles. So that's a couple that occurred to me. But Mark, what about you? Who are some of your favorites?
You know what? You've covered most of the ones that were my favorites. And the other thing and you kind of, Brittany touched on this, the shows I like the most are the shows that we do in-house when we're doing with your associates and your partners, and some of your juniors. I think those shows come off really well. I think it really shows what the heart and soul of Rudner Law is. And because I'm supposed to be, part of my job is helping to market your firm. I think that does a huge credibility, lends huge credibility to the firm, and to let people see who the lawyers are. And like we've always said, when we talk about you, Stuart, it was always about, we want to see the other side of you. It's like when you go on vacations and I say, start doing some videos, start putting them up you said just on my, no, put them up on Rudner Law. Don't just put them up on your personal social media, because people want to see what you're into and what do you like outside of the office. So I think it's the same thing with Brittany and everybody else in the firm when we do those shows where we try to involve everybody. Those are kind of my favorites.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like those are a lot of fun, and you're right. Like I don't want the firm to always be just about me, because that's not something that's going to last. So I want everyone to get to know me, but also the rest of our team. We have an amazing team. So it's good, as you said, Mark. It's good when everyone can get to see who the lawyers are, what our personalities are, and I think we've got a very likable group, so it's just going to make us even more, hopefully, more appealing, and hopefully make everyone in the firm realize that the practice of law is a lot of work, but it can also be a lot of fun. So doing stuff like this should be the fun side.
Cool.
Absolutely.
So we got another former guest wants
Cool.
to chime in. So let's say hello and welcome to Peter Santini.
Stuart, congratulations on reaching your 100th episode of Fire Away. What an incredible milestone. This speaks volume to your dedication, consistency, and meaningful conversations you've created through the podcast. It was truly a pleasure to be a guest on your show, and I'm honored to be part of the journey. Wishing you continued success and many more inspiring conversations ahead. Best of luck.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time. And it's been a long time since you were a guest on the show. Peter was one of the guests on one of our hockey episodes. So it's going well. But Peter, I really appreciate you taking the time to offer those kind words. And we will definitely long overdue to catch up. So thank you. In terms of guests, the other thing I was going to mention, it's not a specific guest, but I'll say that I guess this is when I kind of realized that maybe this show is viable and is going to go on to bigger things, is the first time we had a guest that I didn't know personally. Because the first, I don't know how many episodes, but the first many episodes were people that I already had a relationship with. Maybe it was personal, maybe it was professional, but I knew them. And now they had agreed to be a guest on the podcast. The first time we had a guest that I had never met before, it all of a sudden made it seem like we'd sort of taken a step into a different dimension. I thought that was really cool.
Well, one of the things that I noticed on that topic that I felt was one of the big monumental steps forward was when we started getting approached from people to be guests, where we had marketing companies representing someone, a lawyer or somebody in the States, approaching us to say, we'd really like to be on the show, and this person we think would be a good fit for you. And I think that was a big change. That's the, hey, we're there moment.
Yeah, you know what? That is really cool. Like I'm still somewhat shocked when we get those because I just don't think of myself in that way. But I think the show has been great, and that's been really cool. The
It's
other
okay,
really
so it's not you. It's all about me. Okay, it's just let's get that straight. Okay, it's the guy behind the camera that makes the magic happen.
it's
Okay,
it's the All About Mark show.
yeah, that's it.
I was gonna say, put that aside. I was gonna say the other really cool thing that happened fairly recently and made me realize that, hey, this like people are actually watching is when I was in Aruba back in January at a resort and I was with my wife and we were on the elevator and another woman and I assume her husband got in the elevator and she looked over at me and said, "I know you. I took your course and I love your podcast."
Wow, that's
Wow.
awesome.
So I immediately messaged my kids and said, "I am now a world famous podcaster."
That's so cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well,
So
I know I'm sure you mentioned we like to have a lot of laughs on the show, and in our firm in general. I think everybody, like you said, gets along really well, and we have a good time. We work hard, but we have a really good time, and we've had some really funny moments over the years in Fire Away. Some of them in the firm or team episodes that we've talked about already. So I don't know if you guys want to share briefly, maybe your favorite funny moments.
I mean, to me, there is one that is head and shoulders above everything else that ever happened on this show. And that was when Sean Bodden was a guest. Sean is a very well-known employment lawyer working out of the Ottawa area. I think we've known each other pretty much our whole careers. He's similar to me. He writes a lot and speaks a lot, although I think he's a lot smarter than I am because he analyzes these issues in a lot more detail than I ever do. But we've known each other for years. He came on, we were talking about the use of mediation in the world of employment law and commenting on how a lot of lawyers don't really use or take full advantage of what the mediator can do for them. So Sean was going on and on about how mediators are a resource and lawyers should use them as resources. But how he said it was, "Stuart, you are a tool,"
I remember that.
which I mean, that was by far and away the funniest thing I think that's
Yeah.
ever happened on this show. And of course, we took that little video and just copied it, put it in slow motion, and posted it everywhere. So,
Yeah.
to me, that's by far my favorite memory of the show.
Yeah, that was good. That was, yeah, a number one with a with a bullet for sure.
Hard
Yeah,
to top that.
yeah. I don't know if either of you guys have anything to try to compare to that, but to me, that's got to be
No,
the
I don't
funniest.
think anything I would remember on those clubs can match that. I would just leave that as the star.
I think so. I think that just deserves its own section all on its own.
Exactly.
Okay, so we jump into talking about how the show has evolved and where it's going. So I
Sure.
want to talk a little bit. I think Mark, you've already touched on this quite a bit, but the COVID pandemic, obviously this had a big impact on employment law, and we were all scrambling during that time, as Stuart has highlighted, to figure out what was going on and try to stay on top of a ever-changing landscape. Um, but how did that impact Fire Away? Like, so what are the differences, if any, that you saw running the show pre versus kind of during and post COVID?
Well, I think again, I touched on it earlier. One of the big things was scheduling. It became so much easier to schedule because people were at home. So they weren't trying to balance. I wasn't trying to get them when they're at the office and did they want to be at their office in front of their desk or could they be at home in whatever environment? And because I think we all learned pretty quickly, Zoom became the platform of choice for every business and other than like social or personal stuff, who people would be using Facebook, but then I'm not a fan for that because it had too many glitches where Zoom was designed for this purpose. Exactly. So that was one of the big changes from our side of it, the production side, that it was a lot easier to schedule guests. And then when we stopped doing live as we evolved, then the other thing that came true is that we were able to do, like, for example, as Stuart mentioned, our show, there's one more show before this show airs. And I've had that show for 3 months. So we've started filming in advance. And I think that's really made my job a lot easier because I've got a lot more time to get the edits done, to get the graphics done. There are glitches. There's a glitch that, Stuart and I were talking about today. There's a guest that I want to have on that's going to be on CBC News with a very serious wrongful dismissal case that is going to deal with autistic spectrum employees, and how this employer allegedly bullied her to get her to resign. So that's so timely, I may have to alter the schedule of who's going to be the next show because I want to get that on so that we're able to take advantage, obviously, of the news piece. And, going back to some of the boring stuff that some people out there will appreciate, but the whole change in search now, where the shift has gone from traditional SEO, where content is king, it's shifting to video is becoming what AI wants. Because if you do, even on Google, if you do a general search, if you know the little box, the little AI box comes up at the top now, that's Google's AI or Meta's, no, Google's AI. And after it gives you kind of an overview, the next thing down will be a video, if there's any video clips. So that's become very, very important to have video, and it's all about reputation. So I know I'm going off topic a little bit, but I think it's important. When we've always said about the show, we want to share, we want to educate, we're not going to keep all of our secrets to ourselves, because why not? I mean, we're learning this stuff, so let's share it to the audience that listens to us. It's not just lawyers that are watching us; it's everyday people that are looking at our show. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many things that have changed and evolved with Fire Away, and it's almost becoming a daily thing. Like, I'm constantly, and it's not just for Fire Away, we produce other shows, including my own podcast. So I'm always trying to stay on top of what's the latest, greatest thing that we can do to make the show better. How can we change it? Here's a funny one. Okay, we were just talking. I was talking about this with Natalie today before we're doing the show. One of the things that I've been told by some people that have a greater understanding of how the algorithms work on video is, and I noticed this with one of our guests, and we were on his show. We just talked about it. Hats. So if you follow any podcasts regularly, you may notice that your hosts will be on each episode will be wearing a different hat. So evidently what happens here is the algorithms pick up on that, and it brings people back more frequently because you've changed your appearance. So changing your appearance, which is something I got to talk to Stuart about. Brittany, you talked about what are we going to do in the future to change. Well, one of the things we're going to be doing, Stuart, is you're going to be wearing different outfits.
And different hats, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, if you're comfortable with hats, we can do that as well, because it can't just be the Edmonton Oilers hat, though.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, we're recording this the day before the Stanley Cup playoffs start, so yeah, I think there's going to be an Oilers hat.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. But again, if you asked me professionally to say, "Well, Mark, explain to us why," and I could never explain other than say the results are in, it works. So why would we, sometimes when we talk to lawyers like yourself, Stuart, and your team, and especially your management team, and you, like any business person, wants to know ROI. What's the ROI on Rudner Law, or on, sorry, Fire Away? Well, sure, we can pull numbers. We can do all those things and say, okay, here it is. But you just answered the question for me. What's the ROI? When you're away on vacation, and somebody recognizes you and says, I love your podcast, that obviously it feels good to you. You can imagine how it makes me feel.
Right. And we know it's all about Mark. So.
As we've established.
Exactly. But what do you think, Stuart? I mean, how do you see where we're going from the host perspective?
Yeah, so I was going to take a step backward and then I'll look forward. But that was, probably the two biggest changes. One is that we're now not in the boardroom, so it's just a very different feel. But two, the fact that it's not live, and as Mark was saying, we're now recording them in advance. And it's kind of weird for me because I know we recorded an episode, but I have to think about, has it aired yet? Has it not aired? So I've got to I used to be able to just, I knew if we did an episode before, it's already been aired. Now I've got
Right.
to caution myself about, do I mention it? Do I not? Do I have to say it's coming up soon? So that's the other change. In terms of where we're going, I mean, I was, it was kind of fun thinking about this over the last couple of days. I mean, one thing I will say is I'd love for listeners and viewers to give us their thoughts. So if you have ideas that you want, of topics you want us to cover, please send them in. Or if you have questions, or if you have guest suggestions, like, by all means, please share them with us, because that would be really, really helpful. I mean, one of the things I've toyed with, and Mark, I may have mentioned this to you, or maybe I haven't, but the idea of doing some sort of a mock trial type of thing, or a mock examination. And part of the reason I think this would be useful is that, a lot of our audience are HR professionals, business owners, and whenever we're talking about the legal issues on the show, or just with our clients generally, we always talk about the context of, if you go to trial, if you're being examined, be aware of this. But the reality is most people have never gone through that. And most people, other than what they see on TV or in the movies, have no idea what that actually looks like. So I thought it could be fun to take an employment law case and have some of our Rudner Law team demonstrate what a cross-examination of the HR person might look like, or what the final arguments in a trial might look like. So that's one of the things I've been toying with, and obviously we'll talk that through. The other thing, and Mark, you kind of you kind of stole my thunder here. I was going to say, taking cases out of the headlines and trying to deal with them really quickly. So you mentioned the one that may well be in the headlines soon, if it isn't already. But yeah, I think responding to real life situations, not just cases. Sometimes it's a case that makes headlines. Sometimes it's just a situation that could become a case. So trying to be a bit more reactive or responsive, I've kind of thought about. Mark, we've always talked about the idea of me doing the show from a fun location, whether it was like a park, or a live stream from a conference or whatever, which always sounds like fun, but it's just I've got such a great setup in my home office that it's kind of hard when you have to start thinking about, do I take a microphone, do I take a camera? But doing something like that, I think also could be kind of fun. We had a huge Court of Appeal hearing recently in the world of employment law, but if there's another one, maybe doing some sort of a live broadcast from the courthouse could be kind of fun. So that's another idea. And then yeah, I was actually out for a breakfast meeting this morning with a friend and someone who's been in HR for decades, and his idea of a topic, either for this show or for us to go and speak at events, was an expression I often use, which is the legal and the practical. And the concept was, if you hear some lawyers on TV or on the radio, and they'll say, oh, yes, you have the right to do this, and you can do this, and you can do that, but they don't take the business realities into account. And as we often tell our clients, no, yeah, you legally could do this, but from an HR perspective, from a business perspective, you may not want to. So that's where the practical comes in, and where you can have someone from HR who can give a bit of a different perspective. So that's another topic I am hoping to bring in fairly soon. Anyways, I can keep rambling on about other topics, but I'd love to hear from Brittany and Mark on this.
Well, before we do that, we have yet another former guest that again would like to share their thoughts on what it was like to be a guest on Fire Away. So Brian Epstein has taken the time to send us a video.
Hi, Stuart. Congratulations on your 100th episode. Wishing you another 1,000 episodes, and looking forward to watching and hearing these episodes over the next while. Congratulations.
That's awesome. Thank you, Brian. I appreciate you taking the time. Brian has become a good friend, as well as a great professional colleague. So really appreciate you taking the time. And once you are fully recovered from your injury, we'll get back out on the tennis court sometime soon.
That's wonderful. All right, let's dive back in. Mark, where do you see the show evolving over the next 100 episodes? Stuart's given us some great ideas and suggestions of topics and developments that might be made, but what do you think?
I think Stuart's hit it on the head. I think we have to strive more and more to mine topical subjects, things that are going on that have made what remains of mainstream media, and I use that term with tongue in cheek, We obviously monitor social media for all categories, so we're always on the lookout. This particular one just happened to be someone that I knew from Kitchener who reached out, knew that I had lawyerlocate.ca and reached out to me for a referral. And then I started to see her story show up on social media, and I jumped on it and sent it to Stuart this morning to say, hey, this is a potential guest. And maybe a potential client. I'm not really sure where she's at on that right now. So yeah, that type of stuff going forward. My dream, Stuart knows this as a producer. My dream is to somehow find an employer and a disgruntled employee, not from the same company. I want to put two people in the show that are going to respectfully argue with each other. And that to me is my dream show that I've been wanting for 9 years. And we still haven't been able to put it together yet. But I'm going to find a way to make that happen, because I do think healthy debate makes good video. It makes good content, right? Everybody agreeing with everybody, and it's great. That's cool, and you're sharing information, but it's not as compelling as if you've got two people on opposite sides of the opinion. I say employer employee. It could be HR person employee, because we're still seeing lots of stuff going on where, whether it's right or wrong, HR sometimes earns a bad rap. And I don't see that talked about too much. I don't know whether Stuart's comfortable with that, because you do have HR clients. But, I think putting a light on some of the mistakes that are made, and where they're stepping over the line sometimes, or they're not informing the employee fairly of what their rights are and taking a little bit of advantage of them. I think those are compelling stories. And I think people in general want to hear about those. So going forward, I think we want to expand. I want to see us expand. I want to see us maybe take a little more risk with some of the topics that we're going to do. And I want to see us step outside, sometimes even further, from the employment law and mediation and HR areas, because I think that's it. Variety keeps people interested. So that's kind of where my head's at.
Brittany,
That's
what about
great.
you? Do you have any thoughts for things you'd like to see us do?
I mean, I love the idea of the legal and practical. I think that's such a valuable piece that can get missed is there's the legal reality, there's the textbook answer, and then there's this is the answer with business considerations taken into account. All right. Even like, to do the opposite of your example, Stuart, of, yeah, you can do that, but should you? But the other side of, well, you maybe from a legal perspective, it's risky to do that, but is it worth it for what you're trying to achieve, right? Is this a risk that the business is comfortable with, rather than just saying, no, you can't do that, right? So I think that to me would be a very, very interesting path to go down. I think that would be really valuable. And I'd love to get different perspectives on that. And Mark, in your idea of the HR person and the employee, I think it would also be really interesting to have an HR person and an executive, because I think sometimes there's tension there too, right? Where the HR person is, I mean, kind of in the same way that we are sometimes, of providing advice that's then maybe not being taken. And how do you deal with that, right? How do you navigate that? So I think that could be an interesting perspective as well. I also think we were talking about this before the show, of something else that's changed, Stuart, which is your rants, where you always used to do your, what was the intro? It was, and now it's my time to fire away, I think, is
Yeah,
the,
exactly.
is the intro, which I
Exactly.
love that. But that was always at the end of the show. And sometimes it often related to the topic that we had just covered. And I thought that was a great format. And I think it's really interesting that what seems to have evolved is that the rants are now their own thing. They are living on their own, which is really cool. And I think does open up the ability perhaps of tackling these more time sensitive things, where you don't need to organize a guest or guests and schedule a whole show, but just for you to take that opportunity to have a rant on a really topical issue. So I think that would be a really cool, I don't know if that's an intention at all, but I think that would be a really cool development for the show as well. But I'm definitely really excited to see where it goes. And I think, Stuart, as you said, I would love to have audience suggestions as well, as to what do people want to see, what kind of topics do they want to have covered. I just think there's a lot more to uncover here for sure.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny because we talked about stepping outside the box here, and another former guest that's wants to share her thoughts also is outside of the box, and the topic we discussed on Stuart's show, and Stuart was a guest on her show. Sandra Bacor is just coming up now.
Congrats, Stuart, on your 100th episode of your podcast. We had such a good conversation on episode 85 on getting ahead of employee relationships using mindset. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for the really kind words, Sandra. I really appreciate it. Appreciated being a guest on your show as well. And I learned a term recently, pod swap. I didn't know that was a thing, but apparently, if you agree to be a guest on someone else's podcast and they come back and be a guest on yours, that's called a pod swap. So apparently, we did that without even knowing it. But yeah, I appreciate your support, and appreciate the very, very kind words.
Nice.
It's wonderful.
And it's funny. I was just coming back to what you were. Well, I guess we've all talked about this. I'm actually we definitely should have that debate because Brittany, I mean, how often do we hear employee clients lamenting the fact that the whole system is against them and it's impossible for the little guy to fight, to enforce their rights in Canada? And at the same time, how often do we hear from the employers about how it's impossible to be an employer in Canada and all the laws are against them and employees have all the law behind them. So completely different perspectives. And as we always say, the truth is somewhere in the middle. But we should be able to get two people to come on and have this friendly debate.
Right.
Yeah, that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we run out of time, we have one more former guest that would like to share their thoughts on being a guest on Fire Away. Let's welcome Cameron Atlas.
Congratulations, Stuart, and the entire Fire Away podcast team on your 100th episode. Incredible accomplishment. It was an honor being a part of the show, and I wish you all the best for the future.
I thank you so much, Cameron. I have to say, Cameron was probably one of the first guests we had who I would think of him as being, somewhat famous in this world, certainly at a level way beyond myself. I was incredibly generous of Cameron to come on the show and then take time to record that message. Cameron, thank you again. And he also has a fantastic podcast that I encourage people to tune into, which is very, very different than Fire Away. It doesn't talk about law at all, but he's got way more musical talent than I could ever wish I had. So just for the music alone, it's worth tuning in.
That's so cool. Well, I think that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you so much, Mark. It was really, really interesting to get a look into the origins of Fire Away and talk about some of those really early struggles and really early concepts for the show, and reminisce about our favorite episodes and guests and those funny moments that have happened in between, and talk about where the show is going. Like I said, I think I'm really excited to see the future of Fire Away, and I'm sure there's going to be many, many more favorite guests and favorite topics to come. So thank you both so much. And Stuart, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
Awesome. Well, that's a wrap for this 100th episode celebration. And I have to say, like, thinking back to that first few episodes, I never would have imagined this. I mean, I don't really know what I thought was going to happen, but I don't think I ever even contemplated 100 episodes and 8 or so years down the road. But I'm glad we did it. And Mark, I'm glad you talked me into it because it's been a lot of fun, and I've met a lot of really interesting people and meeting more and more interesting people now as we kind of expand the scope of our guests. So first of all, Brittany, thank you for hosting this episode. Thank you for agreeing to be a guest host on a regular basis. We're not going to get into that discussion of who's the favorite host because I might all of a sudden become the guest host. Thank you for this. I want to thank all of the people who have taken the time over the years to be guests on this show, including those on the Rudner Law team who may not have thought they had a choice, but I definitely appreciated the input that they provided anyways. Mark, got to thank you, Ethan, and your whole team for producing the show and for everything else you guys have done for me and for the firm over the years. So thank you for all that, and thank you for coming on in front of the camera today. I really appreciate that. And of course, thanks to all of you for listening or watching, and for the great feedback over the years. So please like and subscribe. We've got our podcast, which you can find pretty well wherever you find your podcasts. There's also our YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to. I also encourage everyone to check out the rest of Rudner Law's social media. We do a lot. We put out a lot of content, and there's a reason for that. It's really important to keep up to date. So I encourage you to do that, as well to sign up for our newsletter to keep up to date. And that's all for today. So to quote one of my favorite hockey broadcasters, the pleasure was all ours.
At Rudner Law, we want people to treat their employment relationships as legal relationships and make informed decisions rather than assumptions. Keep up to date on Canadian employment law issues by following us on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, and TikTok, liking our Facebook page, subscribing to our YouTube channel, and signing up for our newsletter. Past episodes can be found on YouTube, on our website, and archived on Facebook. And if you like our page or subscribe to our channel, you will receive notifications when the episodes are live. As we always say, none of that replaces legal advice tailored to your specific circumstances. If you think you might need an employment lawyer, you probably do. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us.